night.
Night.
Welcome to Legalize this 14th day of September 2025. And tonight we going to have a very interesting discussion on the U.S. decision to impose visa sanction on the Minister of Government in Grenada over the Cuban-Grenada medical agreement, medical doctors agreement. And we'll also look at the situation with Venezuela. And there are two aspects of the Venezuela situation, but we'll come to that. But before we start formally, I just want to recognize the sponsors of this program, namely Jail Professional Solutions Inc., GEM FM, carrying this program on FM radio in Canada, and also Grenadian Technical and Allied Union, GTAL.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
So, good night once again, Mr. Bissember.
Hi, good evening.
Good night, Dr. Kirton.
Good evening.
And I just want to start by asking Mr. Bissember if you can just introduce yourself to the viewers so that we could have they will all appreciate. I know why, but I know of your expertise, but they can appreciate your background and expertise to speak on this matter.
Yeah, I know. Thanks. I know. Tend to use that word export carefully because some people said export is somebody knows a lot about a small area, but thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation. I think you asked me to join because of my academic and professional experience in international law. I've been around the block for several decades now. I was in the Guyana Foreign Service in the Foreign Ministry as legal advisor. I was legal counsel at the ACP Secretariat. I came back to the region and joined the CARICOM Secretariat as Assistant General Counsel, and then I moved into the Secretary General's office as advisor, first with Secretary General Kirton, and then latterly with Secretary General Larock. I retired a couple of years ago, and I now spend my days teaching at the University of Guyana in Public International Law, CARICOM Integration Law. We do a master's program around this CARICOM Community and Competition Law. And last year I was helping them out with Caribbean Human Rights Law. If you want to ask me why that is so, it's because of my academic background. Like so many of us, I was a graduate of UWI. In my day, I had to go to Barbados for the second and the final year of the LLB. Then I went straight to London, to the London School of Economics to do a master's in law. Came back to the Foreign Ministry, went back out again to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy for a year. Came back in, and I've been in the world of work ever since. On a personal note, let me say that I'm glad I'm on the program. Years ago, when I first started to travel, my mother said, well, boy, if you want to start traveling, I think the first place you should go to is Grenada. Because my dad at the time, Neville Senior, was very close to Sir Eric Geary. And I went to stay with my cousin Jackie and Graham Stratton. I think Graham used to work at the university as a vet. And Jackie used to work at the ministry. And Len Williams, who was the CLICO rep in Grenada and honorary consul, was able to take me to see Sir Eric. So that was my first opportunity traveling in the region. I can tell you, one of the reasons why my mom asked me to go to Grenada is because of Grenadian Beach, which she said is a unspoiled virgin beach. It's one of the longest beaches in the Caribbean. You can walk from one end to the other. And I don't regret at all starting my travels in in your country. So I'm glad to be here, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kirton?
Well, good evening and thanks for having me. I am Mark Kirton and I'm born in Guyana and where I currently reside. I've been exposed to issues in relation to international affairs, maybe both as a lecturer and a researcher for more than 4 decades. I had my undergraduate training at the University of Guyana. Then I went on to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And then finally ending up in a doctoral program, which I finished in the University of Texas in Austin, Texas, in the US. Basically, I've been teaching in Guyana, the University of Guyana. I taught in the Faculty of Social Sciences, and I became the dean of the faculty. And then later on, I went on to the Institute of International Relations at University of West Indies in Trinidad, from where I retired as the director of that institute. My work basically has been in international relations. I have done some research, I have published, and in the area of Latin America and the Caribbean. Actually, my latest publication is a book on Guyana-Brazil relations, tracing the kind of geopolitical environment over the last decades, where we kind of navigated as two states, two neighboring states. Basically, also, my interest is current. I am a director of a small Center for the International and Border Studies, which is basically made up of colleagues, professionals, academics, and practitioners from Latin America, the Caribbean, the US, Africa, and Asia. And we meet virtually, and we try to provide some evidence-based and maybe data-driven research. And we've just completed a study in Africa-CARICOM relations, and we're doing some work now on the issues related to the border controversy. As a matter of fact, Neville Bissember and I have been kind of moving across the nation, sensitizing the citizenry on the issues that are current, and even some of the historical context in which the controversy emerged. And so, indeed, we are working on these areas as we speak. As you know, the issues at the International Court of Justice, and I'm sure we will discuss a few of those issues. So once again, I want to thank you for having me. And as Neville went to Grenada very early, I too went to Grenada quite often between 1979 and 1983, a significant period in Grenada's history, which I really admired. I must say that I was disappointed as a Caribbean person at the outcome and implosion, but I saw some pathways which were developing, which I hope could be replicated in countries in the 21st century in this region. I mean, having said that, I know that might itself bring some, some discussion, but yeah, I have had very positive experiences in Grenada.
Okay. So one of the things that prompted this program tonight, of course, is the sanctions which are imposed on the Grenadian minister and the threat to impose it on other ministers. And more than one person has asked me, and I guess others have had the same experience, as to, in fact, one person said to me something as this: listen, if you and I are in a contract and some third party has a problem, and they try to interfere with the execution, the implementation of that contract, and there is a dispute, yeah? Isn't there a legal system to resolve it? You go to court, the matter is put before the court makes a decision, the parties if they're not satisfied, they appeal. And then basically one party gets a judgment, and then the judgment is enforced. So the question was along the lines, well, if the United States has a problem with Grenada over its contract, over its arrangement with the Cuban government to provide Cuban medical doctors, if the United States has a problem with Venezuela, uh, aren't there avenues for resolving these matters? You have the OAS, you have the United Nations, you have CARICOM. Why is it that these matters are being dealt with in the manner that they have been dealt with? So I think that raises entire issues as to the difference between the law that we live on in our individual countries and that we follow on a day-to-day basis, and then as it contrasts with the law of the nations. So I don't know if Mr. Bissember, you could start by just what is exactly the problem that the United States has with Grenada with regard to that project with the Cuban medical doctors, and why is the approach why are they approaching it in the manner that they're approaching it? Uh, Whether that is in the context of international law lawful, and if there are other ways of dealing with it.
Yeah, right. Thanks. I think that's a good it's a good place where we could start. I know you told me preliminary conversation that you're a lawyer, but like me, I have, and for the wider public, I have some problems with the approach. And in a word, if you ask me why, I just say one thing: unilateralism. Right? Our friends up north from Washington, they believe in this unilateral approach to things. I tell my students all the time when we're doing basic principles of international law, use of force, relations with third states, I warn them that when they look at countries like the United States and Israel, it seems as if the rules don't apply. That is the way how it has been for a long time, coming through from Monroe Doctrine. Dr. Kirton can tell us about that, the whole history of U.S. involvement in Latin America. So the question is this, and I'm just looking to put things in context. This is a story from Jackie Charles, who you probably know is probably one of the best journalists in the Miami Herald. She knows the region inside out, Haiti, the Caribbean. And it was on August the 15th. It says, Grenada Foreign Minister rejects U.S. claims that Cuban medical missions are forced labor. Right? That seems to be the concern, that whether what is going on is forced labor. Now, let's start maybe at the national level and move out a little bit. You mentioned the contract. There's something called privity, law of contract. If you and your neighbor sign a contract, I don't know, for the rental of the place, the property, that has nothing to do with the people living next door. Quite frankly, as we say in the Caribbean, it's none of their business, except if the contract impinges or infringes on the rights of your neighbor. All right, you might have signed a contract with the landlord and it restricts your neighbor's access to water or access to the main road or something. That might have a problem. But if the contract is between two people, Grenada and Cuba, it's not at all clear how our friends in Washington get involved. But as I said, they have this thing about unilateralism. Now, the foreign minister made it quite clear that this is not about forced labor. And let me just read something quickly. I think sometimes, it's an information issue. I don't know if you recall, when Secretary Rubio was coming through the Caribbean, he started in Jamaica, and at the outset from Washington, he was making certain noises about the Cubans and so on. The first stop he made was in Jamaica. And to me, after meeting with the holders government, I don't know, in diplomacy, they might have had what you call full and frank discussions. This is what he said in a press conference in response to the question about these questions. How does the U.S. reconcile its stance on this program with the region's reliance on Cuban medical professionals, and what alternatives does it propose? This is Marco Rubio. I think the first thing is, listen to this. I think the first thing is to separate the medical from the labor issues that we are pointing to. Right away, I think after he spoke to our friends in Jamaica, they realized that, listen, man, this thing is not just about forced labor alone. There's a medical side to the thing. Show the Caribbean and wider beyond, Cuba has had a fantastic track record of supporting our medical system. Right? So he says, this is what he says, this is Rubio. This is not about doctors. This is not about the provision of medical assistance. We have no we have no problem with that. All of a sudden, you got no problem. We have no problem with medical assistance, and we don't have a problem with doctors. We have a problem, and I'm not speaking about Jamaica. There we discussed this today and following international labor standards and the like, but I'm just talking about this program in general, how it's operated around the world. So he back off. Whatever Prime Minister Holness and his team told him, changed the perception. And I think coming down the island chain, same thing when he came to Guyana, we were able to explain to him, Mister, we are not trafficking in persons. There's no forced labor going on here. No, I'd ask you if you had access to the Grenada contract. You said no, but I showed you the Cuban contract was published. And the allegation is that the payments were made through the government, not to the doctors. Again, I don't know what business that is of our friends in Washington. There's a private contractual arrangement between the government of Cuba and the government of Bahamas. So I think what we need to do, and I think the US has come around to that, is to distinguish between the medical aspect and the forced labor aspect. The US have all kind of rules. They issue a report on trafficking in persons. They issue reports on human trafficking. Nobody asked them to do that. They self-appoint themselves to police our human rights, to police our trafficking in persons. But here it is, I think, in terms of the information, from a narrow contractual point of view of a contract between two parties, as you move further out and they apply the unilateralism, I had seen a certain shift in the perception coming down the island chain as Secretary Rubio visited. And I believe we are on the right track now, except that I also saw a recent story where, once again, the US is asking, said the United States has, listen to this, the United States has formally urged the government of Antigua and Barbuda to implement stronger safeguards for Cuban workers employed in the Twin Nations. Now, of what interest it is to our friends in Washington of how Antigua and Barbuda regulates the safeguards for Cuban workers. There's a fundamental issue there. It comes back again, just like in the Bahamas, in Grenada, in Jamaica, and now in Antigua, between the United States unilaterally inserting itself into contractual relations. And I believe that's where the problem arises, and that is how we will have a problem going forward. Fortunately, diplomacy being what it is, when you sit and you dialogue and you talk, I think I have noticed certainly a change in the US perception of what's going on. And hopefully, I think to the extent that they distinguish between the labor issues and the medical issues, we are on the right track. Finally, let me say, in my previous life in Brussels, in the ACP, when Cuba was trying to join the ACP group, I think the story makes a point. Normally, to come into the ACP group, you open economic and trade relations with the European Union, you sign on to whether it's LOME or at the time the Cotonou Agreement, and then you join the ACP group and you become party to the Georgetown Agreement. For the first time, there was pushback from the Europeans. Not all of them, I can tell you. People like Spain and so on were a little more flexible than some of the hardliners, the UK at the time and so on. And Cuba was refused entry to the European Union arrangement. So unlike the previous arrangement, they couldn't sign on to Cotonou Agreement and then sign on to the ACP. When the news came to the ACP group that fateful morning, led by people like Sir Sridhar Ramphal, there was loud objection on the position that we were being dictated to by the EU, whether Cuba could join the ACP group or not. And I tell you something, people talk about acclamation, the amount of noise and banging on the table that came when Sir Sridhar proposed that Cuba nevertheless be allowed to join the ACP group was definite. It was definite, all right? And later in talking to some of my African colleagues, just like how we know they were singing the praises of Africa and Cuban cooperation in healthcare, sports, culture. We know their role in the liberation struggles in Southern Africa. So I think the US or nobody should forget that, what Cuba stands as a figure in terms of development cooperation in the region. That's why I think we need to separate the two issues, the health aspect and the forced labor aspect. I know I've gone on a little bit, but just to give you some perspective
That's right.
of where we are. Thanks.
But I wonder if we could butt in here for a minute. The U.S. has labeled this kind of a coercive labor export scheme, as they call it, which to me is very unfortunate in that from that international relations perspective, one saw where Cuba has for years, decades, as Neville indicated, been providing excellent service across the Caribbean and providing those professionals as we never had some of those professionals in Guyana in the 50 years since its inception in the Cuban Medical Brigade. And so across the region, this act of solidarity must immediately, I think, be recognized. And I believe that CARICOM as an institution must be more robust in its approach to the US in dealing with this issue. Because I see it kind of just fading into the background in a while. And then again, just today I saw it's gone further than the Caribbean. I see now Brazil, some health officials in Brazil, their visas are being rescinded or based on their association with the medical support that Brazil is getting. So it's not over. This is why I think that we can't let it fade into the background, because as many island states have recognized, the kind of service the medical brigades have provided kind of have saved so many lives that we can't let it go. And therefore, once again, I would appeal in a sense for a more robust and a real strong, a real robust approach that must be given. CARICOM, I think, has an important role to play as an institution and as a grouping. We can't have different signals being sent. We have to work together to ensure that we continue to benefit from that human service that the Cuban professionals are providing. So from an international relations perspective, in 1972, the countries of the Caribbean, in the midst of the Cold War, removed the isolationist thinking and recognized Cuba. And just in the midst of the Cold War. And now we have, in 2025, another effort at splitting, fragmenting the CARICOM region by our friends from Washington, as Neville calls them. But we have to, I think we have to, as a grouping, really work assiduously together to ensure that the Cubans have that same kind of contractual engagement and arrangement, and that we don't cower to the wishes of the United States at this stage.
Juba, want to come in?
Rather interesting introduction. Quite useful introduction on behalf of Bissember and Dr. Kirton. But Neville Bissember talks about unilateralism. Can there be real diplomacy if a big, powerful country like the United States decides to impose its unilateral positions on small developed countries, underdeveloped countries like we have in the Caribbean.
Oh, I know. Oh, you were posing the question. You see, look, throughout most of my professional life, as a diplomat, coming from a small developing country, I've been in different fora, the UN, ACP, the Europeans, CARICOM, interacting bilaterally and so on with Cuba, the US, some other countries. What we very often have to do, almost as a rule, is to turn our weaknesses into strength. You know, you mentioned about a big, powerful country. I certainly have found that in the context of a negotiation, as I explained to you, you could see Secretary Rubio's tone and what he was saying change as he came into the region, got more accurate information, and realized that there are different sides to the coin. No, the question arises. You said they're big and powerful. Fine. And they don't want Cuban government to be involved in trafficking. What are their main problems? You know, you got to look a little beyond it. And people say the real objective. They're talking about labor standards. You know what is one of their main problems? That the Cuban government has been benefiting financially from the payments that were made to the medical doctors. And why is that? Because of some anachronistic trade embargo that was born out of the Cold War that they have been insisting over the decades in imposing on Cuba at great financial and economic strain against the people of Cuba. You know, Mark can tell you that he knows Cuba better than I do. I mean, Barack Obama tried, you know, he visited Cuba, they tried some things. Funnily enough, in between Trump and Biden came in, Mr. Biden wasn't too gung-ho about going back to the Obama era. And the US was still pushing back. A lot of the developments, I use the term loosely, that we saw under the Obama era were rolled back, like inviting Cuba to the Summit of the Americas. Biden didn't invite them to, where was it, California. So I think part of the issue is if they're so big and bad, right? And you're against the Cuban labor issues or trafficking in labor. Let's leave aside the financial aspect, which we know at the back of their mind is one of their concerns. If you just look at the humanitarian aspect, and as I explained to you, for as far afield as Africa, the role that Cuba has played, is the United States, as this same big and bad country, are they going to step into the breach and send replacement doctors? Are they going to step up to the plate and undertake that humanitarian role? I mean, look, let's break the thing down. If you want to sanction a man and take away his visa, that's one thing. How the man family commented? Why you want to take away the foreign minister's family visa? What them do you? What have they done to you? This is the extent that our friends in Washington go to. When you try to rationalize it, when you see the negative impact that it brings on the healthcare system, show the region.
But do they really care though? Do they really care? I mean,
that's what I'm saying to you, my friend. It is for us.
At its most basic.
It is for us. It is for us to explain to them. And let me tell you something. If you go to the non-traditional sector, like the Middle East or to China, and get that replacement medical assistant, they get more vexed. It's the same people. It's the same people who want to keep China and Kuwait and these countries out of the region. But if we don't find, fine. If they want the Cubans to get out, fine. But you must replace them with American doctors. Look, they remove funding from USAID. They pull out to the WHO. You can't have it both ways, my friend. And we have been finding ways, and means I can tell you from personal experience. Listen to me now. From personal experience. You see, during the COVID, for me personally, I was in the Secretary General's office at the time, taught me who your real friends are. I don't know if y'all remember, but in the early days of COVID, you see, we're talking about like April, May 2020. You know where the first vaccines came from? The first vaccines came from India. Prime Minister Modi picked up the phone, he called Ms. Motley, he said, hey, I'm sending 4,000 vaccines for you. She pick up the phone, she called her friend Ali. She said, look, I sent in 1,000 vaccines to you. And she called my Secretary General. And she said, SG, you haven't closed down the Secretariat. You got people working there. Out of that 1,000, 100 is for you. The Russians. Remember the issue with the Sinovac and the Disovac and so on, and the US didn't want to give it approval? The WHO was rushing approval for those vaccines. You know how long we had to wait at the US to get vaccines from them? Our friends, our traditional friends, the Canadians, the US had stockpiles of vaccines, pile up in warehouses, spoiling. And it's our non-traditional partners we turn to. So, with the same token, this same, we call it big, powerful, unilateral people. If you only look in the other direction, look what's going on in my country. In Trinidad with the Queen's Hall Conference Center. In Jamaica with the road from Montego Bay to Kingston. The Chinese are doing a lot of infrastructure work. And the US don't like it. But they can't have it both ways. You can't tell the Grenadian government or the Antigua government, you must tighten up your labor standards and keep the Cuban doctors out. And then when the healthcare system is in crisis, you don't want to step into the breach. And when we go outside to non-traditional sectors, then I mean, no, please, you can't have it. You can't have it both ways.
I agree, Neville. The humanitarian element, I think, is significant. Here you have the Cubans over the years, stepping into a vacuum that was created by the lack of professionals and trained medical personnel in this region. So many people have benefited. And indeed, if you ask the US to replace those with some kind of brigade, I'm not sure if the response is going to be positive. I'm not sure at all. As a matter of fact, I believe indeed that we got to look strongly at what CARICOM can do it as a grouping. Because we did it in 1972, as I mentioned, when the Cubans were in isolation. And up to today, we still recognize Cuba and have strong linkages. And we stood up to the United States. So why not now?
Dr. Kirton, you made strong points about CARICOM earlier, and you're making a strong point about CARICOM now.
Yes.
But the state of CARICOM today, do you think that we are in a position to, as we would like to say, hold one head and approach this issue?
Well, remember, this is life and death issue. This is where we don't have the professionals trained or available in our region. We have Cuba in an act of solidarity, providing medical personnel in critical areas. I think we have to transcend this narrowness and insularity in issues such as this one. Because here you have people who can die and you're not nothing replacement. America is coming with no team to help us. We need as a grouping to recognize the seriousness of this issue and act with one head.
As a matter of fact, if anything, they have been attracted our nurses and medical support professionals into the US and into the United Kingdom, which is the thing in reverse, right? This is the thing in reverse. But I'm attracted to Ms. Mclean's question because just even the way how you pose the question, I know where you're coming from. Think, boy, CARICOM can't agree, CARICOM this, CARICOM that. I spent a long time in the Secretariat, and a lot of people don't look. Sometimes you feel like a fly against the wall in some of those discussions. I mean, with the greatest of respect to our heads, they have some serious discussions. I've been involved in discussions on I use the term loosely, touchy issues like Palestine, Venezuela, and the range of opinions for and against is such that very often it's difficult to come out with one unified solution. That's the first thing. Secondly, let me read something quickly, which I think a lot of people probably don't even know or overlook from the CARICOM revised treaty about how our foreign policy is coordinated. This is what it says, right? Establish measures to coordinate the foreign policies of member states of the community, including proposals for joint representations. Listen to this. And seek to secure as far as practicable. A lot of people don't see that phrase and seek to secure, as far as practicable, the adoption of community position. It didn't say we must agree on everything. The treaty never said we must agree on everything. And if you're not
And
satisfied with that,
that's the revised treaty you're reading from, right?
yeah. That's the revised treaty.
Yeah,
This is the treaty on the role of the Council for Foreign and Community Relations, right? Seek
But
to
never-
ensure.
There's one such issue, isn't it? This issue of medical professionals and a humanitarian approach.
Right.
About Cuba.
By the way, Mark, we're not seeing your camera. I don't know if you turn off your camera by mistake. I saw it. I'm not seeing you. Yeah.
yeah, the camera is off.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Anyway, but we were hearing you. Yeah. So that's the thing. Whatever the issue is, it's not like we must sit down and kowtow and everybody must agree.
But didn't the Bahamians make a decision to curtail the program with the Cuban medical mission?
As I understand it, again, that's why I said coming through the region, I think they have adopted a bilateral approach. They're dealing with each country individually. I remember Ms. Motley and Prime Minister Gonzalez at the outset saying, hello, well, you can keep your visa. Because I remember she's saying quite clearly, this thing about who not getting paid and so on doesn't apply to them. That's why I say, look, I mean, sometimes my experience is some line person in our office who doesn't have all the information, who might have written a brief about this thing, or it's done by some right wing. I'm serious. I am serious.
But
I've been
seriously,
involved with these things with the Europeans, where they have less than accurate information. And we
that
have to
position,
find-
that position which you articulated there about some low-level diplomat or bureaucrat in a minute, the position as articulated by the U.S. in relation to the Cuban medical mission is akin to the U.S. position in labeling Cuba a country that is the sponsor of terrorism. It is, before it used to be a country that sponsored guerrilla groups across Latin America and the Caribbean. All of these are part of an attempt to isolate Cuba. So I'm not so sure that we can really say that this is not official government policy at the highest level. You made a point about Motley and Gonzalez saying, yeah, we give you a visa. But why is it the US took the decision not to go after Motley and Gonzalez, but to go after Finance Minister Cornwall?
That's what I'm saying. They're dealing, as I understand it, they're dealing with the issue on a bilateral basis. I just read to you from the time Mr. Rubio jumped on his airplane from Washington, by the time he stopped in Jamaica, he was saying something different. He said this is not about doctors. It's not about Jamaica, them doing the right thing. But I think whoever wrote the brief for him had less than adequate information. And clearly the negotiating position that Prime Minister Holness and his team took was able to convince the same big, powerful unilateral, the US, that they're going about this thing in a different way. We don't have the details of the Grenadian contract. The Bahamian contract was leaked. I guess from what I see in the contract, money was paid. But again, as I said, I think the US had a problem with the amount of money that was going to the Cuban government.
That's correct.
Nothing about the quality of the healthcare that was being given to the Bahamian people, or as Dr. Corton said, whether that vacuum, that gap that would have been created if you pull out the medical doctors would have been replaced by them. All I'm saying, is that, look, these things have different issues. There are a lot of moving parts, and the U.S. is famous for that. The U.S., you're seeing it right now with Mr. Trump's foreign policy. One office doing one thing, another office doing another thing. The other thing we need to realize is that visa sanctions are very, I use the term loosely, personal in relation to a country, if I could use that term, right? Look, a visa is a right for you to enter somebody's country. Even though they impose the sanction from outside, basically what they're saying to the foreign minister is, look, don't waste your money on buy a plane ticket, because when you come to the border, you will be refused entry. But it's really a sanction for you not to enter their territory, which is one type of sanction which they have every right to do. We all in the CARICOM, it's even in the revised treaty, have relations, even with the free movement. We can always curtail access for national security reasons, for reasons of public health, for reasons of public morals. Every country in the world allows that. So security and immigration is a personal thing. There are other types of sanctions. We can come to that maybe afterwards. Like a Russian oligarch sitting down, and because he's funding President Putin's war, you sanction the man and you take away his pleasure yacht. The man didn't even come nowhere to the United States, within thousands of miles of the United States. But the extraterritorial legislation, the extraterritorial jurisdiction reaches out all across the water and sanction a man till in Moscow. That type of sanction, as abhorrent as it is in a different quality from the type of sanction.
But that doesn't comport with international law, though. That kind of action on the part of the U.S. and some of those European countries.
I use the word abhorrent, but go on.
No, I find it unfortunate and really unacceptable. But here you have an individual who's working in the interest of his country or the state in which he resides, that his visa or his effort to go to enter another country is denied based on his thinking that I have to help my people to attain some or to get some form of medical support. I mean, I isn't that not wrong in relation to a country that prides itself on the democratic process and all the rights and freedoms globally? They talk about it all the time. But here you have a country, a small developing state, who is attempting to get or to continue receiving humanitarian support from a sister country, and you take away a visa because an official is seeking to ensure that humanitarian effort continues to help its people. I find that unacceptable.
Just my question is this, but it's more than a question. I'm gathering that Neville, you're saying that, listen, the United States policy is one of unilateralism. And I think you are, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying further that basically we can't change that. But I'm getting from you and also Dr. Kirton that you believe a lot of engagement, like the way the Jamaicans engage with Rubio, may be able to lessen or mitigate some of the negative fallouts of that kind of unilateralist approach. Am I correct?
Basically, yeah, I'm saying that's the power of negotiation. We're at small
Not selective
countries.
unilateralism, Neville?
Yeah. Sorry?
Is it not selective unilateralism?
Well, that too, because other people, even on things like democracy, they have some friends who don't hold elections, and it's not a problem. But if we don't hold elections, it's a problem.
Yeah. I mean,
Because part of in fact, even in the promo advertising the program, part of what we wanted to discuss is in this kind of almost in this kind of environment where rules applies only to some and it doesn't apply to others. How could a small country as Grenada and Caribbean countries in general, how could we navigate our way to achieve the things that we desire and to maintain relations and to survive basically with dignity rather than having to bow to everything? What kind of tools and so can we use? I guess you're saying that engagement, diplomacy, negotiations is one of those. And what kind of capacity we would need in order to be able to pursue that kind of path?
Well, I think I used the example earlier about turning weaknesses into strengths.
Yeah.
Right? Is the power of negotiation. If people are speaking to you, as I believe might have been the case, with less than all the facts, you explain to them that, listen, man, this thing have nothing to do with trafficking in persons. It has to do with bolstering our healthcare system. Yeah, and to the humanitarian element. I raised the question secondarily. You say to Mr. Rubio and company, okay, if y'all don't want the Cuban doctors, are you going to replace them with alternative healthcare workers? If the answer to that is no, it's excuse me, hello, we will have to go and look elsewhere. To the Middle East, to to um
China.
to China and India. And they ain't gonna like that. So they can't have it both ways. You know, years ago under Mr. Biden, he had issued a statement sometimes saying that something like this. I'm paraphrasing. He will dedicate his life to making sure that China don't become the greatest power in the world by 2030 or something. They were so fixated on Chinese advancement. Listen to me. Nature abhors a vacuum. We didn't ask the Chinese to come here, you know. The Chinese have been coming slowly in Latin America when the US was looking away. Don't worry with them, man. They're okay. They stop with the coups and things. They stop with this Latin American military thing. Don't worry with them. And the Chinese came in right through South America, Latin America, the Caribbean. Now they're vexed. They're pushing back. But all I'm saying is you can't have it both ways. And in the context of diplomacy, right, you don't have to custom or anything. You can have structured conversations with full information, explain to the folks up north what the reality is, and show, as I said, why you must take away a man's visa or a man's family visa. That's your business, it's your country. If you don't want the man to come, fine. But don't, as a process of that, impair the quality of healthcare. You see the difference? Sanctioning somebody with a visa is one thing, but stopping doctors from coming and impacting negatively on the healthcare system is something completely different.
Okay,
But
let me,
I wondered if even the position, the unilateral position on the part of the U.S. in terms of arbitrarily denying, I don't think that is in keeping with the international treaty and diplomacy either. If my memory serves me right, when I from my years as an international relations student, I think that the convention and diplomacy does not allow for a country to just do as the US and all of these others have been doing. As it relates to diplomacy, yes, diplomacy is in terms of who enters your country. That's you have the right to do that. But the arbitrary, capricious nature in which it is being done, as it was done in the case of Finance Minister Cornwall. I was trying to find the treaty here, but I didn't come up with it. But I don't think that they're acting legally, and I think that's the point that needs to get out, because a lot of the actions which these big countries take are not in keeping with international law, which brings us to the point as to whether the rule-based order that was promulgated and came into existence after the Second World War with the United Nations and so on and so forth, whether that has run its course to the extent that it ever was rule-based. Has that run its course, and are we not now in an era, in a period where we have to look behind that and to try to develop new guardrails, new structures that would help for the advancement of humanity?
Yeah, two things. I'm going to say again, this visa thing, this national security thing is a touchless issue. I don't know, I have not applied for US visa in the longest while, but I remember on the form, is there something, 212B something or whatever, where they're not obliged to give you reasons why they refuse the visa. That's their business. They don't like your aftershave, you can't come. Nowadays, if you have something anti-Semitic views on the internet, they're checking all your social media records. You can't come. That's their business. That's a national territorial thing. They want to keep out certain people. It's their visa. You don't want to go, fine. You know, at some stages, people tell me it's best you go through Panama and you go through Miami. the shopping is just as good, and you don't have to deal with homeland security. So if you could avoid going to the United States, fine. Some people can't. You know, we have an issue developing now in New York with Hamas and President Abbas. It's a separate matter, but in the UN, the rule has always been that the US can't withhold a visa for somebody to come to the United Nations. I've been at the...
That's the point I'm making. That's the point I'm making.
Let me learn. I've been to the UN General Assembly with Castro, but not at the same time. Castro, Ortega, Chavez, Maduro. They still give them the visa. But when they come, they are under certain restrictions. Most of them stay on 42nd Street up the road, so they don't have to travel far. They can't move around. They certainly can't leave New York State and go to Washington or go to Atlanta or anything. They just come for the general debate and they leave. I see now they say they want to stop President Abbas from coming. Listen to me, they tried that some years ago. When, as you were talking earlier, when people like, we were moving from calling the ANC and the PLO terrorist organizations, and they were transitioning into liberation movements. And they didn't want Chairman Arafat to come to the UN. You know what the membership said? Listen, we're going to move the General Assembly to Geneva, you know. The UN has an office in Geneva, headquarters. It's configured for all the member states. The state of New York, listen to me, the state of New York complained because of the amount of money they make during the General Assembly from rental, restaurants, accommodation, services, transportation, the amount of money New York makes. And I think in the end, Arafat didn't come. So the visa thing is a national issue, but for certain reasons, their flexibilities apply to it. That's one kind of sanction. Secondly,
Yeah,
at the larger level, there are other aspects, and I come back to the thing about the humanitarian aspect. All right?
So let me ask a straight question. If, for example, Minister Cornwall wants to attend a meeting at United Nations or one of these other institutions, what will be the situation?
Yeah, I think once when he fills up the request for the visa, and you know, then obviously the reason why you're going and so on. Like for instance, the general debate normally starts in the third week in September. That's another couple of weeks. And there'll be a set of politicians and diplomats, leaders descending on New York. To the best of my knowledge, I don't know, I've been out to the thing for a couple of years now, but an normal course of dealing. People who are under sanction, Mugabe, I've been to the UN with Mugabe, with all these sanctions and so on. And they give you a limited visa. You know, people memory short, you know. Before 9/11, the US had a thing called TWV. I don't know if you ever see it. Transit without visa. You could have gone to the United States without a visa. You pass it through Miami going to, I don't know, wherever. They used to let you come once you have an onward ticket. All that finished after 9/11. Right? The system was so flexible. Fine, they've tightened up. But for diplomatic reasons, normally during the General Assembly, if the minister could justify it, maybe they might say he's not a foreign minister, so he can't go. I don't know. But there might be there are a lot of side meetings where they're talking about HIV and AIDS, the Sustainable Development Goals. As far as I'm concerned, I hold no brief for the United States government. But once the request for the visa can be justified, it has to be issued. That's why with President Abbas, when they said they were going to refuse his visa, President Macron and one or two other people from the European Union have already said that they're going to recognize Palestine as a state during the upcoming General Assembly. And people are like, hello, you're going to stop Macron from coming? Because he's already taken a side with Palestine, which is contrary to the US position. But you're hearing nothing about that, I guess, because France is a permanent member of the Security Council, and you probably can't stop him from going. Right? But to the best of my knowledge, once the request is made, we have had sanctioned individuals in Guyana that I know have been sanctioned for one reason or another. The visa was pulled, but subsequently they've applied for a visa either to transit. One time I know a gentleman was going to the Bahamas, he's going to Miami. They gave him a 2-entry visa, one to go to Bahamas, one to come back. And the flexibility had been applied. But I'm saying it's a very touchy thing from a national security point of view of the visa sanction. And we need to distinguish that from the other types of sanctions. Like the other day with Trinidad, right? PM Rowley had to get, come on, PM Rowley had to get permission from Washington, thousands of miles away, to go ahead with the Dragon Field deal with Maduro. How? What that has to do with people thousands of miles away in Washington? But that's how they apply their sanctions. Because Venezuela is under sanctions, you can't do business with them unless the U.S. agrees. Something is fundamentally wrong there. And as it is, they pull the approval. They pull the approval from the Dragon Field, now that the Trump administration has changed. So yes, from the security perspective, but from a foreign policy perspective, in terms of the conduct of international relations or international economic relations, some of these visas don't really make sense, and they really are inequitable. And to answer your question, the rule-based system that was created in where? San Francisco in 1945. We've come a long way from there, to the extent that not one, not two, they got 3 permanent members of the Security Council now. The US, Russia, and China, that behave in ways which question the role as the final arbiter from a security point of view in the maintenance of international peace and security.
So
Okay.
are you saying that the French and the English abide by the rules?
No, I never said that. All I'm saying is that if you look at how international relations is conducted now, okay, Russia, if you ask Mr. Putin if he invaded Ukraine, he said, no, I ain't invaded. It's a special military operation. If you ask the US if it's genocide in Gaza, they will say no. The Israelis are retaliating for terrorist attacks by Hamas. If you ask China what they're doing in the South China Sea, they will tell you they're protecting their sovereignty. But there's no sovereignty in that strip of international straits under international law. People find a justification. It's not right. They find a justification, right? The US is the one when they get ready, they say non-aggression, don't use aggression. And then they're going to blow up a boat of a third state, thousands of miles away from them. So you gotta assess the situation and really respond in the way that diplomacy requires. And I have always told people, you have to choose your battles well. You have to choose your battles well. Don't jump in every battle. All right? You have to choose your battles well.
Okay, so at
in this
this
era,
point,
sorry, no, I'm
Yeah,
saying
I
in
was
this
saying-
era of international disorder, institutions like the United Nations have really gotten now a diminished kind of role, and the expectations of the international community or the citizenry of the world is one of eroded confidence in that kind of institution. There's no rules-based approach. I mean, you see arbitrariness by some of the major states in this world that make you shudder to think what it is that the United Nations can do now in relation to bringing that back to a level where people understand how to deal with the diplomatic, the diplomacy that characterized the past. It's not there. It's not there, and so this rules-based thing has gone out of the window a while now. And how do we fix it? How do we fix it? Now, I want to go back to the Caribbean and this issue of dealing with this humanitarian effort. And Ms. Mclean had asked a question. I've been thinking on it for a couple of minutes now. We have, all the states have, national interests. We could, small states, we have different interests, but we have to have some mechanism, right? Because you asked how you can do it, some mechanism as CARICOM to ensure that we get the kind of negotiating mechanism in place that we could deal with this particular issue, where I think we have a level of unanimity, I believe, if we were to approach it well. And Neville, I don't know what are the structures in place in CARICOM at this stage, but I think CARICOM has to approach the United States again as a group with everybody on board, because That's the problem we will face, and I'm sure they ain't finished. They're coming again. I'm sure.
Okay, Dr. Cotton, just hold the point a minute. And when we come back, I want us to continue that, but also shift to the US Venezuela issue,
Sure.
which I think this point is very, very relevant. I just want to recognize the sponsors of the program, Jail Professional Solutions Inc. Jim FM carried the program on FM radio out in Canada and Grenadian Technical and Allied Workers Union, GTAC.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Yes. So to start back, I just want us to, I don't know if Neville, you could just tell us and the viewers, what exactly is the issue between the US and Venezuela?
Mark is the Latin American expert. You know?
No. As I tell you, experts know more and more, but less and less, right? Actually, well, basically, as you would know, the issue of what they term maximum pressure has been placed on Venezuela based on, we see quite recently, that they have been indicating that Mr. Maduro is one of the leaders in the export of narcotics. They've placed $50 million bounty on his head, and at the same time, they've moved on a different cover, I would say. They've moved a flotilla to the Caribbean Sea, that's all Venezuela, arguing that they're there to interdict drug movement and to move and to ensure that they get a grip of the movement of drugs which impact the United States. They move so the Caribbean Sea is perhaps caught between supplier states and demand side. But we have in the middle countries, small states, Guyana, Trinidad, and the rest of the Eastern Caribbean perhaps, caught now in a situation in which the US is moving very quickly, it appears, to accelerate the pace of this interdiction of drugs, which they see as being detrimental to the health of US citizens. All of that, I think, is, I call it Diplo speak in some ways, because you see, I believe, an attempt at regime change in the Venezuelan situation. Now, we recognize that Mr. Maduro has been ostracized by most of the international community. I mean, the elections were held, and he did not win, according to all of the documentation available. And we see some efforts being made by the United States to remove that regime type from occupying the status of government. I mean, there's no recognition now of Maduro, President Maduro, as a legitimate power in the country. But that leaves us in the Caribbean with an issue, because here we have country, the United States, they just bombed or fired on a boat which allegedly had 11 drug traffickers, they claim, in international waters, contrary to international law, and Neville, I'm sure, can give us all of those interpretations. And here we have a situation which is escalating. There's indeed increasing tension. And we see in the context of CARICOM, some states actively, once again, supporting that kind of approach. And we see the fragmentation, once again, of CARICOM. I heard with the Prime Minister of Trinidad saying, you should bomb all of them and kill them, they're bad. And not a word from the Caribbean community, as far as I am aware. So here we have, yes, we have the United States in the Caribbean Sea. We have what could be an impact on the region as the tensions rise. Should there be any kind of escalation in those tensions and open conflict, we can have kind of impact in the Caribbean, or we don't as yet have any effort by the Caribbean community of coming up with some strategic engagement among the states to see to what extent they can reduce some of those tensions in the region. That's how it started.
But did you say that Maduro did not win the elections?
Yes, according to the all of the data available, he did not win the election, and we see where his rival had to go into exile, and there are some states which have not recognized the results of those elections. I mean, even some Latin American states, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, etc., have not.
But was there conclusive evidence of that by any independent body?
I think there has been some recognition that that the results of the elections indicated that he did not have the number of votes as many as his rival, and that in a sense suggests that he didn't win the election. But there was some engineering, some manipulation, and he was installed. Now,
Which international body said that?
I think there were some observation missions, and also I believe that there was enough evidence within Venezuela, all the statements of polls, etc., which had indicated that he didn't win.
No, I asked that because I mean historically, you have these excuses for hostile action.
Yes.
But you have Iraq with the nuclear weapons, Iraq nuclear weapons. Even Grenada here, the hostages with the students, Panama jobs, So I asked that just to be wary because.
Well, I don't support the U.S. intervention in that kind of manner at all. But I'm saying that domestically in Venezuela, there's obviously
yes, they have a domestic issue, and I think it's for them to resolve. Basically, a domestic issue.
Yeah,
I just asked it not as just to be clear on that.
Yeah.
But
Dr. Kirton and Mr. Bissember, how does the tension between US and Venezuela affect the small island Caribbean states, and not only small island Caribbean states, but right now, how would that affect Guyana itself in terms of the ongoing territorial dispute?
Well, I think Guyana has to be concerned in that any efforts at maybe escalating the crisis between that flotilla out there and the Venezuelan government can have negative spin-offs in Guyana and maybe the region.
yeah,
You know, pardon?
Mr. Lane agrees. He was saying, indeed, he agrees.
Okay.
But didn't the Guyanese welcome the American flotilla into the Southern Caribbean?
Yes, but my view is that we have to be careful and strategic in that approach. In that, in my view, the U.S. If there were to be any escalation in the tensions with between Guyana and Venezuela, I'm not certain that there would be an immediate response by the U.S. in relation to Guyana, to the defense of Guyana. I may be very unpopular in that view, but I think the issue would be their own interests, which are in the water of Guyana, the Exxon and another interest which they have in Guyana's maritime space. So I think we have to be concerned, to my mind. I mean, Neville may not agree, but but I think that the reliance solely on the U.S. in relation to Venezuela is one that is too narrow. We hear that the U.S. is our most or only reliable partner in terms of any kind of support. But I would argue that we should go beyond that and don't rely only on the U.S. presence in our midst.
But isn't there a role for, in terms of that, the Guyana Venezuela dispute, a role for strong diplomacy, negotiations, CARICOM being involved to try to manage that situation?
Well,
Because,
we've gone beyond that.
correct me if I'm right, but my understanding is 130 years ago, when that dispute, Guyana Venezuela dispute kind of lit up a bit, the Americans were actually on the Venezuelan side.
Well, the
100
dispute
130
ended,
years ago, 60 years ago.
the dispute
Yeah,
ended.
I'm going back to 130 years ago.
Yeah, but the dispute ended in 1899 with the arbitral award, which was a full, final, and perfect agreement, which talked about the space being demarcated, the boundaries being demarcated in 1899, and in 1905 we saw where the mixed commission with British Guyana and Venezuela actually demarcating those boundaries. And it was not until 1962 that, with Guyana on the cusp of its independence, we saw Venezuela going to the United Nations and saying that a gentleman who was dead by then left a letter that said that there was some collusion among the arbitrators, and therefore it was null and void. And so since then, we've had that kind of aggression that was unprecedented in our history, where between 1966 and 2025, we've seen all kinds of acts of aggression against Guyana. And remember that in 2016 and 2018, that issue of the question of the validity of the 1899 arbitral award was taken to the International Court of Justice by the United Nations Secretary General. And so it is there. While Venezuela might say they don't have a jurisdiction, the ICJ doesn't have a jurisdiction, and we see them going sporadically. And now, even on 11th of August, I think they presented the final memorial, counter memorial. So I say that just to put it in the context.
But I was just addressing the point that you made in terms of the U.S., for example, pursuing their own interests. I was just making that in the context that 100, and my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, on the eve of that arbitration, the Americans were actually on the Venezuelan side, because that was in the interest at the time, because they wanted to keep the British out.
Remember, it was the Monroe Doctrine here, yes.
Exactly. So
And
that's
so it's interest politics.
that's exactly the point I'm making. So I was supporting your point. I would need to be careful
Yes.
because
Yeah. We don't know where they are.
it's not driven by any principle, but it is driven by what is perceived as their interest at any point in time.
And one could argue here that the only thing you could predict about the U.S. administration currently is its unpredictability. Today you can get a different type of approach on the negotiation, the backroom that may be going on, which may not be in Ghana's interest totally, could have some impact. So I think we have to be really strategic as Guyana in how we look at this particular situation.
Neville, I think you want to comment on this?
No, well, yeah, yielded to Dr. Cornwall. Well, he had asked a question, which I think is relevant to us, about the forum where CARICOM can deal with issues like this, and the two issues are related: the Cuban aspect, and then this one. Essentially, I mean, I was reading from the treaty earlier. There's COFCOR, the foreign ministers, and then, of course, at the higher level, the heads of government. And then Ms. Mclean asks, where does this leave small states in terms of reaction? So let's unpack a couple of things. Again, for context, I've been in a discussion some years ago. This would have been in the first Trump administration, when there was talk about regime change and all kind of thing in Caracas. This is the time when, look how life changed. John Bolton was Trump's national security advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And who the man who has since said, yes, he used to be involved in discussions on regime change. And CARICOM had two emergency meetings of the heads of government. And we managed to put out a statement that didn't cost down the US, that didn't go overboard in terms of support. We found a formula, right, which off the top of my head, I tell you, it refers to things like non-interference in the internal affairs of states, respect for sovereignty, and the sanctity of borders. We said nothing about Mr. Trump, don't go and invade Venezuela, or only left Maduro alone. Nothing like that. But the language that we use was sufficient enough to send a signal that, we need to respect the same rule-based system. That was a couple of years ago. Fast forward now to the current situation, and as I understand it, the government of Guyana issued a statement when the U.S. announced that they were putting a flotilla of vessels. People say, you don't need a submarine to combat drug trafficking, but they put some vessels in the water to combat drug trafficking, narco trafficking, which is nothing strange. We have been collaborating with the U.S. for years, the British, the Dutch, the French, in drug interdiction activities offshore. We have shipwright agreements. We put people on their boats, they put people on our boat. So what Guyana was supportive of was having U.S. vessels patrol, as they have been doing in the past. It's just that they increased it a little more for drug interdiction. No, please. Drug interdiction is different from shooting a boat out of the water. Trinidad now came out with similar language. Yes, I think, and the Prime Minister, I know the Prime Minister, she's a lawyer herself. We've worked in previous meetings before. She's a lawyer. She must understand things like self-defense. In the chat, I just read briefly something to you just now in Article 51. Basically, but what it says is that an armed attack must have occurred. This thing about a preemptive strike, and what we see with 9/11 and weapons of mass destruction, and until now we never find no weapons of mass destruction, yet they go and bomb our country. It's not on, right? The law quite simply says an armed attack must have occurred. No armed attack has occurred as yet on the United States of America. More importantly, a pirogue going through the water between Venezuela and Trinidad cannot for the life of me constitute an armed attack on the mighty United States. I don't know that we sign up for that thing, Guyana. The PM now in Trinidad, she has come out a little more, and as Mark said, yes, bomb them out and so on. Let me just stop for a second and let's have a reality check. You got a drug boat or a alleged drug boat sailing from Venezuela to Guyana with drugs on it. You have some drone or something up, you see the boat, you bomb it out of the water. The people who know about these things say that normally these drug boats only have like one or two people on it. You know why? Because they maximize the load by limiting the amount of bodies on the boat. This boat had 11 people on it. Were they smuggling drugs or were they smuggling people? If it's people trafficking, it's different from drug trafficking. The US, again, unilaterally, had declared Tren de Aragua a terrorist organization. Again, in terms of the rules, drug trafficking, by no stretch of the imagination, could qualify on the same level as a terrorist activity. Now, again, for the reality check, if you in any, I don't know, in a city in America, Boston, Chicago, New York, wherever, and you see a car going down the road with some people in it, and you get a suspicion that they're carrying drugs, what do? Do you blow the boat? Do you blow up the car in the middle of the road and kill everybody? No. The police give chase, they arrest the car, they stop and search the car, they carry out interdiction. I'm saying is a qualitative difference between what originally started out, which is patrolling to keep our Caribbean Sea a zone of peace and to interdict drug traffickers, and blowing a vessel out of the water. Secondarily, you could quote unquote justify terrorism because people set out to do harm, to visit violence, to blow up structures, people in America, American aircraft, whatever. That is one type of activity that international law has said. But things like war crimes, slavery, those serious crimes, you have certain rules that apply, not drug trafficking. So if you wouldn't blow up a car in a city in America that is alleged to be carrying drugs, how could you justify blowing up a pirogue thousands of miles away off the coast of the United States? I just want to read some information. Look, it's from a Democratic source, Occupy Democrats, but it came from Senator Jack Reed. He's a Democrat, but he's a ranking member on the Senate Armed Services Committee, where he said they had gotten a briefing. And it says, the evidence presented by MAGA Pentagon to justify the military strike on a boat, I'm quoting, does not prove that they were drug traffickers for Tren de Aragua. So they have received information that they're not sure if what they did was a drug interdiction activity. As you said, the people who know about these things say normally with these drug boats is the bowman, or maybe a porter, and the man manning the engine. Two of them, not 11. So there are a range of things that have changed. It's a moving target, but I don't know that we in the Caribbean, and again, I come back to the point of the activity some years ago under the first administration. I don't see why CARICOM as a group, I explained to you that it's not everything we have to agree on, but we can find a language to one, support drug interdiction activity, or to say that an armed attack on an unidentified vessel without with less than full information is contrary to international law. We ain't call nobody name, we ain't cost nobody, but again, like with things like Palestine, like with things like Ukraine, it's a very touchy subject. I've been in some of those meetings, and to find a consensus among the group very often is difficult. But all I'm saying is that we need to separate the issues between drug interdiction and blowing a boat out of the water. The rules, as it is, as set down in the charter, the Article 51 says the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs. The armed attack has to have occurred. In addition to it, is the right to self-defense. If you and somebody have a beef in the street and the man coming to box you, how are you going to pull out the gun and shoot the man? That's excessive force. There are rules about these things. Proportionality, necessity. Blowing a boat out of the water does not qualify. Blowing a drug boat out of the water does not qualify. So we can find language, but I don't know if the political will is there at the moment. But I certainly, as we've done some years ago, we found language without condemning the U.S., without praising Maduro, to explain that CARICOM's position was on non-interference in the internal affairs and respect for sovereignty. We could find language again on this occasion to speak positively to drug interdiction, but to speak negatively about an armed attack preemptively. The law does not allow for preemptive attacks. An armed attack has to have occurred, and with the greatest of respect, a drug boat sailing between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago, by no stretch of imagination, can constitute an armed attack on the great, mighty, powerful United States of America. That's where we are right now. And we
But
need
once
to find-
again, we see the fragmentation of CARICOM on this issue. We've heard nothing from several of those who are normally very upfront in some of these issues.
yeah.
We've heard nothing.
Well, remember some of the leaders who attended the ALBA meeting. I think they joined in an ALBA statement. I think that was St. Vincent, Antigua, St. Lucia, and
Dominica, maybe Dominica.
Dominica.
Yeah.
And then Kamala Prasad Bisessa came out with a contrary position.
Right. Now, even in the larger CARICOM group, and as I'm going back to that example, we had people from ALBA in the room. I remember the meeting, Mark, it might have been before your time. President Granger coincidentally was chairman of CARICOM at the time. It was a rough meeting because obviously from Guyana, he had a national position
Yeah.
vis-a-vis Venezuela. You had men in the room who were supportive of Maduro from an ALBA perspective. You had other people in the room who were more leaning towards the United States. And we must remember that under the Trump administrations, they have never met with CARICOM as a group. Mr. Biden used to meet with us 3-4 times. Mr. Obama used to meet with CARICOM. Sometimes they include Dominican Republic for their own economic reasons. But Mr. Trump, if you remember, some people were invited to Mar-a-Lago years ago. They go and sit down outside the room and have to wait on the gentleman. They have never met with the group. And I don't know if this occasion again, where we need to make ourselves relevant and reach out. Mr. Rubio did his bilaterals through the region. I think he met with the OECS collectively. But as far as I can recall, no CARICOM US meeting has since taken place. If they want to deal with us bilaterally, we can still find language. We can still use our diplomacy to find that balance between the ALBA folks and the more rules-based people. You know, this language thing is a skill. Mark will tell you. It takes time.
But what it is that is preventing the region as a whole, the CARICOM? Is this fragmentation permanent?
I don't want to. I'll say it. I'm not making an excuse. The way how these things work normally, the issue comes up,
Yeah.
and I have colleagues in the secretariat who are responsible for doing a draft, calling around. The secretary general might reach out. Very often, the chairman at the time has a crucial role to play. And with the greatest of respect, I think the current chairman up to recently was very distracted, Mr. Holness. Right? The man had an election to win or lose. I'm not saying that is the reason, but it may well have been the case that at the time the focus was not there. We from the secretariat, my colleagues from the secretariat, we can't do it on our own. They might already have a draft there, waiting for circulation. But if from the heads of government level or the foreign minister's level, maybe they can call an emergency meeting of COFCOR. But, and nowadays with Zoom technology and some people don't have to travel, we going into the General Assembly. Normally in the margins of the General Assembly, the COFCOR meets and the heads meet. I mean, there's another 2 or 3 weeks. But already we could do the work from the secretariat point of view to prepare a text. But all I'm saying is that it might have been something to do with it, that the chairman at the time, and of course his distinguished Foreign Minister, Senator Johnson, might have been a little distracted with their domestic affairs. A statement from CARICOM wouldn't win an election. I had to point that out to some people years ago. A statement from CARICOM condemning Maduro would not win votes from Ms. Mclean. They all have countries to run. and they have national interest to protect. So let's get over that hurdle. Maybe now that the elections are over, both himself and President Kali could focus a little more, and we may well get some language to find that balance, that delicate balance. But certainly, on the basis of first principles, I can draw a distinction between collaborative activity, which we have been doing over time with the US, the British, and others to patrol the Caribbean and keep it as a zone of peace, as opposed to taking aggressive military action, which was not, I believe, the original intention of the activity in circumstances where the information is less than adequate to justify the action that had been taken.
But Mr. Bissember,
Aye.
the incursion this time by the United States is a qualitative difference, though, in the sense that a lot of the drug interdiction effort was done through the American Drug Enforcement Agency, whereas this is a clear military insurgent, which is in direct contradistinction to what you normally do when you're fighting drugs. So this is more a pressure point under the pretext of fighting drugs rather than an effort to really fight drugs.
I think
And then
Dr. Court. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's all right.
No, I think Dr. Corton alluded earlier to the unpredictability of the United States administration. And let me give you some examples. All right. Shortly earlier this year, after under the Biden administration, they had eased up some of the sanctions against Venezuela and allowed Chevron to restart oil activities. Earlier this year, the Trump administration put back on the sanctions. A few months after, they removed the sanctions, but with conditions. This would have had to be at the State Department level, maybe somewhere between State and Commerce. Right? At the same time, what the lady name? What's her name? Pam Bondi, I believe. Justice, a different department. The Justice Department, the Attorney General increased the bounty to 50 million. You just give Chevron permission to start drilling for oil, and another department increased the bounty on Maduro, and then the Defense Department now launched a set of boats off the coast of Venezuela. When you put those three things together, that's what Mark is talking about, the unpredictability. Three different agencies in the United States of America sending different signals. The other thing we need to remember is our friend Secretary Rubio, who you might know is of Cuban extraction, right? Secretary Rubio has a certain predisposition. I don't know if you all remember during his Senate confirmation hearing, he made a powerful presentation without notes, without missing a beat, going through the region, analyzing Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, the socialist boys, and what the US had intended to do on that communist, well, not communist, that's a bad word nowadays, though, that socialist arc in their backyard. Right? So when you factor that in as well, I think from the State Department perspective, Mr. Rubio might have a certain position which is not necessarily reflected throughout the administration. Then you got other moving parts like the National Security Agency, which is in the White House. It's very difficult, as Dr. Corton says, to predict what the U.S. will do because of the unpredictability. And in that kind of fluidity, we need to be careful. What I'm saying is that we go back to first principles, the basic principles of the use of force, non-interference, self-defense. If we apply those principles, we can come out with language that doesn't, I use the term loosely, anger anybody. We ain't got to call nobody name, but I don't know, as I said, in the court context, whether the member states at present, because of elections and other things, um, were a little distracted. With the greatest of respect to the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I think her position was a little even more advanced than her successor, Dr. Rawley, and
So
some of
they plan their
and,
own shit, right? Because even when he came in, didn't even tell me that he was here yet.
hello. Yeah,
Yes,
and
there's a bit difference.
yeah, and some of the other member states in the region. It's a common issue that we have, trying to find that balance between the different competing interests, but with the requisite will and the requisite leadership. I say with the greatest of respect to Prime Minister Hollis, the gentleman might have been a bit distracted, and maybe now is the time for us to find a way forward to see how we could salvage a position. Bearing in mind, as I read from the revised treaty, the position is to find common ground as far as practicable.
Yeah, okay.
You know, we have a situation. We have a go on. Go ahead.
No, but for the average citizen of the Caribbean,
Uh,
this must be seen as significant overreach. I mean, you got all kinds of nuclear-powered submarine, they say, and some significant military assets in the interdiction process. I mean, you ask yourself, yeah, what is this about? I mean, for the average citizen, would say this can't be no 11 men in no pirogue you're going behind. There has to be some other motive for this large flotilla to be present, and they tell me it's going to be there for significant periods of time. So the Caribbean, I believe, have to look at it dispassionately. Look at it, and I agree with you, Neville. Yes, the issue of drug interdiction. I never saw so many military assets yet looking for any kind of drug. So we got to look to see what it is that and what could be the impact on the Caribbean
But
through this situation.
question, Dr. Kirton.
Yeah.
Does diplomacy in any way forestall these kind of actions? I think Mr. Bissember and Mr. Layne pointed to instances before where, regardless of diplomatic efforts, when these big powers, we saw it with Grenada, we saw it with Panama, we saw it with Libya, we saw it with Russia, we saw it with Iraq. Once they throw down the gauntlet, they are just looking for an excuse, and sometimes they manufacture them, as we might have seen with the destruction of the pirogue of Trinidad, because we don't even know if that pirogue was coming from Venezuela. And in fact, I have seen some things where some people said it might have been a AI. The boat might have been an AI creation.
Well, Juma, I wanted to raise that, but I was waiting for somebody to say it. Because that's the point that has been floating around the internet. That boat is.
Well, I think I have something here from Miss Delcy Rodriguez, our very good friend, the Vice President Rodriguez, who said she went down to the area where the boat, I can't remember, some in the south, I believe, in Venezuela. She went to the area where the vessel was supposed to have left from, and she has spoken to the survivors' family, the family that survived the people that were killed, and they're mourning and they're grieving and so on. So if that is confirmation, I mean, it's information or disinformation. If that's confirmation, at least she's saying that yes, the boat left from
Venezuela.
Well, I read somewhere, and I'd like to confirm it, that some bodies were found off Tobago.
Right.
I don't know if that has been confirmed, but I mean, so we were talking here whether it is AI. Now, what would be the reason for the US to fabricate or to develop this AI effort? Just for PR purposes, to escalate tension and to bring the Caribbean into conflict zone? What? I don't see why they would want to have an AI generated incident.
Well, there was the Gulf of Tonkin.
Once again, unpredictability of the US. Yeah, maybe.
There was the Gulf of Tonkin. There was the incident in Cuba with the blowing up of the main. So they manufacture incidents all the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, but in this particular case, what would be the driving motive in relation to bringing to the Caribbean public? Is it to increase tension? Is it
to manufacture consent? That
okay.
here's this.
But
here's this.
Just explain to me the AI thing, because I didn't follow that. What is being said? The incident didn't really take place?
Something like that, from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and some of the stories that I saw said that it was not a real incident.
Yeah.
That the ship was actually an AI creation, and
Yes,
the incident was not a real
Why
incident.
would they be promoting that if it was not a real incident?
Well, why? Well, it took some people doing some investigation to conclude that it wasn't a real incident.
No,
But-
but I'm trying to think. What do they have to gain from?
Well, that's my question.
What do they have to gain from saying that this incident took place when it didn't really take place?
Remember, as far as I understand it, one of the big issue is that President Maduro is the head of this drug cartel, which has been labeled in American law a terrorist organization. And that there was this terrorist ship that was transmitting drugs to the United States. And they had 11 men in it, and we blew it out of the water. It was only later that Marco Rubio said that, the ship wasn't going to come into the United States, it was actually going to Trinidad. But the initial statement from Trump was that the ship was going to the United States.
No, I think what I was saying is that even if it was going to Trinidad, it would have been for transshipment of the drug to the United States. So this is from the Trinidad Express. It says, speaking from Sucre State, the region from which an alleged drug trafficking vessel struck down by the U.S. last week is believed to have originated. And Delcy Rodriguez said she went and visited and she talked to the family. Now, look, again, let's put things into context. Unilateralism, the same great United States, them just decide Trinidad and Tobago is a terrorist group. On what basis? Who set the rules? You just, like somebody aftershave and say, hey, you know what, you're a terrorist. The U.S. decide that Trinidad and Tobago is a terrorist state, and now drug trafficking activity carried out under the umbrella allegedly of Trinidad and Tobago amongst the terrorism. Now, I explained earlier, terrorism traditionally, we had issues in the region about foreign terrorist fighters returning and so on. Terrorism traditionally is visiting violence against property or persons, say a U.S. boat, a U.S. airplane. We don't have hijacking that much anymore. They're going to blow up somewhere in America. That is terrorist activity. These drugs that Mr. Rubio said were going to the United States. Who are they going to? Who are they going to? Nobody in the United States of America asks for terrorists to come and blow them up. But the drugs that are passing through the region are based on a simple economic principle of demand and supply. So if Mr. Rubio have a problem with drug trafficking through the region, he must at the same time deal with the supply side and the demand side. We have the supply coming through here. He want to blow people up. If there was no demand for the drugs in the North America, with the greatest of respect, I had this problem when I was in Brussels at the ACP with the European Union. We used to explain to them that guns are made in factories, Beretta, Smith & Wesson, is American. Fabrique Nationale. These are European companies. They leave from factories. They're marked out. They're inventorized. These people pay tax. Drugs just making the bush. And it was easier for our European friends to trace the guns that were fueling the arms and ammunition coming into our region than it was for us to interdict drugs, because we don't know where they're making some bush. Ever so often in my country, they find out how much 100 acres in a back dam. You don't know where it's coming from. It's easier for them to police the making of arms, or in this context we're discussing here, it's easier for them to police the demand for drugs. So, Mr. Rubio, with the greatest of respect, if you want to blow up boats off of Trinidad, that is one thing, but please, I beg you, deal with the demand side. Deal with the demand side in North America, and some of that supply will be diminished. The other argument I see from people who know better than me, I think Delcy said so too. She said, "Why are you worrying with the Caribbean? Go off the coast of Africa." Because apparently the fellas now moving the drugs all the way around from Africa straight across. So there's some information that the flow of drugs that the US has decided is so bad and so evil and so terrorist oriented in Latin America and the Caribbean might not be the accurate and true picture for the demand and supply equation, because there's drugs moving off the African coast in the other direction. So why didn't put boats off the coast of Africa to blow people up there when they have drugs moving from there too? So as I said, there are several moving parts.
Okay, we are coming up to the end, but I don't know if Aisha, you could just read some of the comments.
Yes, so let me read the comments from the audience. So we have Marcel Belmar. She says, exactly, Trump is only concerned about monies going to Cuba and not the low wages of no Cuban doctor. Alison Matlin says, the duck said he controls the world. Michelle Bissember, she says, interesting discussion. Alison comments again, the UN is a paper tiger. It has no power. Cyrus Griffith comments, how can CARICOM confront the US as one, and the PM of TT has a different opinion on the matter? Martin Felix, I've never seen any credible report that the Venezuelan election was inconclusive or that the election was stolen. Cyrus comments again, so if the claim is true, then was the evidence provided international for the world to see? SM Barnwell, they could have generated AI seen to create fear and to show power, to show might. The US created the demands for drugs. Exactly, they must deal with their drug issue on the ground in the US.
Michelle Monsieur only made that comment about the interesting discussion because she's trying to flatter me. She's my former colleague from the Secretariat.
Okay. We have to end in about 10 minutes, but I just want to ask this in particular to both Mark and Neville. Given the unilateralism of the US and the breakdown of the rules-based system, and given that we as Caribbean countries, even if we are united, may not be able to prevent the US from doing what it is doing or what it wants to do, would there still be value in those countries who are opposed to the kind of unilateral actions taking place to record their position, albeit in diplomatic language?
I think the opportunity will present itself in another few weeks during the general debate. Everybody will traipse up to the UN and get 50 minutes in front of the camera to make statements in the general debate. We will look to see some of that language that I'm talking about. if it will come out. We don't have a tradition. Well, let me say it like this. CARICOM doesn't make a statement. Unlike the European Union, which now has a special status in the UN, the CARICOM secretary doesn't speak at the UN. The member states individually speak, but sometimes, if there's a consensus, the chairman, PM owners, can make statements on behalf of the group. That's a matter for the individual member states to decide. So we might get.
How about GRULAC? I know UN.
No. GRULAC is just a regional grouping for the purposes of like voting and working out positions.
But could they not be in a position for with states that are friendly to CARICOM in a sense?
Yeah. I don't think the rules allow those regional groups like that. We are Western European and others, or Asia. I think the group is so diverse now. I mean, we talk about the Alba Boys. GRULAC, I think, is like 30 something. And to get a consensus statement at this particular time. The other thing is this, when we talk about the rules-based system, I don't think those rules that were worked out since 1945 in San Francisco in the United States contemplated a kind of arrangement where you had an administration in Washington that talking things like "Make America Great," and people say foreign policy is an extension of national policy. If you see some of the things that is going on right now in the United States, lack of due process, the the Supreme Court just issued a ruling saying it's okay for ICE operatives to stop and interdict people because of how they look and if they speak in Spanish. Like the fundamental shift in these rules that we all were growing up and we were asked, is the US bring us to the WTO? Is the US push us to some of these things? And now the current administration, this one in particular, are doing things outside the framework of the rules. How we bring them back? Mr. Gutierrez, with the greatest of respect, is trying his utmost best. And people say sometimes when you try your best, it's not good enough.
But he's the head of the, he's
Secretary General. Secretary General. It's difficult because of the environment. So let's see what some of the statements sound like. As I said, I don't know if the US is going to have a meeting with CARICOM as a group. We normally have a lot of side meetings. And again, coming back to my earlier point, Prime Minister Modi has now instituted an annual CARICOM India grouping. Nature abhors a vacuum. The Chinese have been meeting with us in different fora. If our friends in North America are not inclined to deal with us on that basis, we have other alternatives. We can look in other directions. But as a general principle, I think some of the rules that exist right now really don't fit into the kind of conceptual approach that the current administration is operating under. The gentleman, I don't know, the term limits in the US, I guess the next thing you're going to hear now is that he wants to do away with the term limits. That's our internal domestic matters for the folks in the United States. I don't think we can get into that. But all I'm saying is that you have to look at what's happening nationally, from a national point of view, to see if that, in fact, is extended at the foreign policy level. But let's see what the upcoming weeks at the General Assembly brings forth, and hopefully we can get some clearer signals. Thanks.
Right. So could we take as your closer?
Okay, well, I believe that we have to go further, Neville, in relation to CARICOM's approaches. We have to go, for example, to the African Union to put the positions there, and even though they may not have a voice to make a statement at the UN, but ensure that they're fully sensitized to Caribbean positions. The African Union, I understand there was a summit recently, right?
Yeah.
But I think it has to be a consistent approach to those other regions and alliances.
Yeah, the coalition building.
That has to be really, sustained and sustainable by CARICOM.
Yeah, a coalition of like-minded states.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, Dr. Kirton and Mr.
Where
Bissember.
where is the nine-line movement when we need it?
That's the
Well,
question.
Yeah. Jobo? Any,
No, I
any?
no particular comment. I am quite pleasured being on a panel with Neville Bissember and Dr. Mark Kirton. I think it's the second time I've seen Dr. Kirton on one of these programs. It's the first time
yeah. He's a popular guy, you know. He's a very popular guy.
It's the first time I'm getting a chance
Yeah.
to hear
You
December. Quite a knowledgeable diplomat. So it's a joy to be on here, and I'm sure the audience learned a lot.
You're sounding like Macaulay. You're sounding like Macaulay from Caricom now.
Aisha?
It is unfortunate that I wasn't attending UG at the time that Mr. Bissember was teaching. I'm sure I would have enjoyed his class, particularly his human rights class. That would have been an interesting experience for me. But I'd like to thank you and Dr. Kirton both for appearing this evening. The discussion was well informed and it gave me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our audience as well, because they were very engaged in the chat throughout the entire program. So thank you both so much.
Well, I can think of several other things I could be doing on a Sunday evening, including watching the Amazon Warriors whoop the Barbados Royals tonight. But
I hope that's what's happening.
this was an important occasion, and
Yes, yeah.
Mark prevailed upon me, and he said, "No, we put our priorities straight. We could probably watch the tail end." And,
You're in the playoffs already, so you see.
good.
but no, thanks.
I
Yeah,
really
it's
want
good.
to thank you very, very much. And I must say, I
My
found
pleasure.
this
My
very
pleasure.
interesting tonight. And for me, what really came out is the role of diplomacy, I guess, in this very, very difficult international environment where the rules that existed before either have collapsed or quickly collapsed. Yeah, so I want to thank you, Dr. Kirton, and thank you, Mr. Bissember, for coming on. Thank you again, Aisha, as usual, Jobo, and thank you to all the viewers of this program. Thank you so much, and good night. Thank
Good night,
you.
My
everyone.
pleasure, sir. My pleasure.
Good night.